Lesson 6, Using Variables, Strings, and Arrays. In this lesson, you'll learn 3 tools for storing data in JavaScript: variables, which store numbers or text; strings, which are special variables for working with text; and arrays, which are multiple variables you can refer to by number. The topics we will cover are using variables, understanding expressions and operators, data types in JavaScript, converting between data types, using string objects, working with substrings, using numeric arrays, using string arrays, and sorting a numeric array. At this point, it's safe to say that you've probably had enough experience using variables that they will be fairly easy to figure out without much help. Nevertheless, there may still be some aspects of variables that you don't know quite yet. Just to be sure, we are now going to look at some of them in a little more detail. Variables are named containers that can store data like, for example, a number, a text string, or an object. Each variable, of course, has a name. There are specific rules you must follow when choosing a variable name. Variable names can include letters of the alphabet, both upper and lowercase. They can also include the digits 0 through 9 and the underscore character. Variable names cannot include spaces or any other punctuation characters. The first character of the variable name must be either a letter or an underscore. Variable names are case-sensitive. Total num, and total num are separate variable names. There is no official limit on the length of variable names, but they must fit within one line. Using these rules, these are some examples of valid variable names. Some computer languages require you to declare a variable before you use it. JavaScript includes the var keyword, which can be used to declare a variable. You can omit var in many cases. The variable is still declared the first time you assign a value to it. To understand where to declare a variable, you will need to understand the concept of scope. A variable scope is the area of the script in which that variable can be used. There are 2 types of variables. Global variables have the entire script and other scripts in the same HTML document as their scope. They can be used anywhere, even within functions. Local variables have a single function as their scope. They can be used only within the function they are created in. To create a global variable, you declare it in the main script outside any functions. You can use the var keyword to declare the variable, as in this example. This statement declares a variable called students and assigns it a value of 25. If this statement is used outside functions, it creates a global variable. The var keyword is optional in this case, so this statement is equivalent to the previous one. Before you get in the habit of omitting the var keyword, be sure you understand exactly when it's required. It's actually a good idea to always use the var keyword. You'll avoid errors and make your script easier to read, and it won't usually cause any trouble. A local variable belongs to a particular function. Any variable you declare with the var keyword in a function is a local variable. Also, the variables in the function's parameter list are always local variables. To create a local variable within a function, you must use the var keyword. This forces JavaScript to create a local variable even if there is a global variable with the same name. This should give you a pretty good understanding of the difference between local and global variables. If you're still a bit confused, don't worry. If you use the var keyword every time, you'll usually end up with the right type of variable. You can use the equal sign to assign a value to a variable. For example, this statement assigns the value 40 to the variable lines. You can use any expression to the right of the equal sign, including other variables. Because incrementing or decrementing variables is quite common, JavaScript includes 2 types of shorthand for this syntax. The first is the plus equal operator, which lets you create this shorter version of our earlier example. Similarly, you can subtract a number from a variable using the minus equal operator. If you still think that's too much to type, JavaScript also includes the increment and decrement operators plus plus and minus minus. This statement adds 1 to the value of lines. Similarly, this statement subtracts 1 from the value of lines. You can alternately use the plus plus or minus minus operators before a variable name, as in plus plus lines. However, these are not identical. The difference is when the increment or decrement happens. If the operator is after the variable name, the increment or decrement happens after the current expression is evaluated. If the operator is before the variable name, the increment or decrement happens before the current expression is evaluated. This difference is only an issue when you use the variable in an expression and increment or decrement it in the same statement. As an example, suppose you have assigned the lines variable the value 40. These two statements have different effects. The first statement displays an alert with the value 40 and then increments lines to 41. The second statement first increments lines to 41, then displays an alert with the value 41. An expression is a combination of variables and values that the JavaScript interpreter can evaluate to a single value. The characters that are used to combine these values, such as plus and slash, are called operators. You've already used some operators, such as the plus sign and the increment and decrement operators. This lists some of the most important operators you can use in JavaScript expressions. When you use more than one operator in an expression, JavaScript uses rules of operator precedence to decide how to calculate the value. This table lists the operators from lowest to highest precedence, and operators with highest precedence are evaluated first. For example, consider this statement. If you try to calculate this result, there are two ways to do it. You could multiply 5 times 3 first and then add 4 with a result of 19, or add 4 plus 5 first and then multiply by 3 with a result of 27. JavaScript solves this dilemma by following the precedence rules. Because multiplication has a higher precedence than addition, it first multiplies 5 times 3 and then adds 4, producing a result of 19. Sometimes operator precedence doesn't produce the result you want. For example, consider this statement. This is an attempt to average 4 numbers by adding them all together and then dividing them by 4. However, because JavaScript gives division a higher precedence than addition, it will divide the d variable by 4 before adding the other numbers, producing an incorrect result. You can control precedence by using parentheses. Here's the working statement to calculate an average. The parentheses ensure that the 4 variables are added first and then the sum is divided by 4. In some computer languages, you have to specify the type of data a variable will store. For example, a number or a string. In JavaScript, you don't need to specify a data type in most cases. However, you should know the types of data JavaScript can deal with. These are the basic JavaScript data types. Numbers such as 3, 25, or 1.4142138. JavaScript supports both integers and floating point numbers. Boolean or logical values. These can have one of two values, true or false. These are useful for indicating whether a certain condition is true. Strings such as I am a jelly donut. These consist of one or more characters of text. The null value represented by the keyword null. This is the value of an undefined variable. For example, the statement document.write fig will result in this value and an error message if the variable fig has not been previously used or defined. Although JavaScript keeps track of the data type currently stored in each variable, it doesn't restrict you from changing types midstream. For example, suppose you declared a variable by assigning it a value. This statement declares a variable called total and assigns it the value of 31. This is a numeric variable. Now suppose you change the value of total. This assigns a string value to total, replacing the numeric value. JavaScript will not display an error when the statement executes. It's perfectly valid, although it's probably not a very useful total. JavaScript handles conversions between data types for you whenever it can. For example, a statement like this. This statement prints out a message such as, the total is 40. Because the document.write function works with strings, the JavaScript interpreter automatically converts any non-strings in the expression, in this case the value of total, to strings before performing the function. This works equally well with floating point and Boolean values. However, there are some situations where it won't work. For example, this statement will work fine if the value of total is 40. However, the total variable could also contain a string. In this case, our last statement would result in an error. In some situations, you might end up with a string containing a number and need to convert it to a regular numeric variable. JavaScript includes two functions for this purpose: parseInt, which converts a string to an integer number, and parseFloat, which converts a string to a floating point number. Both of these functions will read a number from the beginning of the string and return a numeric version. For example, these statements convert the string 30 angry polar bears to a number. After these statements execute, the numVar variable contains the number 30. The non-numeric portion of the string is ignored. Strings store a group of text characters and are named similarly to other variables. As a simple example, this statement assigns the string "this is a test" to a string variable called test. JavaScript stores strings as string objects. You usually don't need to worry about this, but it will explain some of the techniques for working with strings, which use methods or built-in functions of the string object. There are two ways to create a new string object. These two statements create the same string. The second statement uses the new keyword, which you use to create objects. This tells the browser to create a new string object containing the text "this is a test" and assigns it to the variable test. You can assign a value to a string in the same way as any other variable. Both of our previous examples assigned an initial value to the string. You can also assign a value after the string has already been created. For example, this statement replaces the contents of the test variable with a new string. You can also use the concatenation operator to combine the values of two strings. This shows a simple example of assigning and combining the values of strings. This script assigns values to two string variables, test1 and test2, and then displays an alert with their combined value. If you load this HTML document in a browser, your output should resemble this. In addition to using the plus operator to concatenate two strings, you can use the plus equals operator to add text to a string. For example, this statement adds a period to the current contents of the string's sentence. From time to time, you might find it useful to know how many characters a string variable contains. You can do this with the length property of string objects, which you can use with any string. To use this property, you will need to type the string's name followed by .length. For example, test.length refers to the length of the test string. Here is an example of this property. The first statement assigns the string "this is a test" to the test variable. The second statement displays the length of the string, in this case 15 characters. The length property is a read-only property, so you cannot assign a value to it to change a string's length. Two methods of the string object enable you to convert the contents of a string to all uppercase or all lowercase. ToUppercase converts all characters in the string to uppercase. ToLowercase converts all characters in the string to lowercase. For example, this statement displays the value of the test string variable in lowercase. Assuming that this variable contained the text "this is a test," the result would be this string. Notice that the statement doesn't change the value of the text variable. These methods return the upper or lowercase version of the string, but they don't change the string itself. If you want to change the string's value, you can use a statement like this. So far, you've worked with entire strings. JavaScript also enables you to work with substrings or portions of a string. You can use the substring method to retrieve a portion of a string or the char@at method to get a single character. The substring method requires a string consisting of a portion of the original string between two index values, which you must specify in parentheses. For example, this statement displays the 4th through 6th characters of the text string. At this point, you're probably wondering where the 3 and 6 come from. There are 3 things you need to understand about the index parameters. Indexing starts with 0 for the first character of the string, so the 4th character is actually index 3. The second index is non-inclusive. A second index of 6 includes up to index 5, or the 6th character. You can specify the 2 indexes in either order. The smaller one will be assumed to be the first index. In our previous example, 6, 3 would have produced the same result. Of course, there is rarely a reason to use the reverse order. As another example, suppose you defined a string called alpha to hold the alphabet. The following are examples of the substring method using this string. The char@" method is a simple way to grab a single character from a string. You specify the character's index or position in parentheses. The indexes begin at 0 for the first character. Here are a few examples using the alpha string. Another use for substrings is to find a string within another string. One way to do this is with the index of method. To use this method, add index of to the string you want to search and specify the string to search for in the parentheses. This example searches for this in the test string. The value returned in the loc variable is an index into the string, similar to the first index in the substring method. The first character of the string is index 0. You can specify an optional second parameter to indicate the index value to begin the search. For example, this statement searches for the word fish in the temp string, starting with the 20th character. A second method, last index of, works the same way but finds the last occurrence of the string. It searches the string backwards, starting with the last character. For example, this statement finds the last occurrence of Fred in the names string. As with index of, you can specify a location to search from as the second parameter. In this case, the string will be searched backwards, starting at that location. An array is a numbered group of data items that you can treat as a single unit. For example, you might use an array called scores to store several scores for a game. Arrays can contain strings, numbers, objects, or other types of data. Each item in an array is called an element of the array. Unlike most other types of JavaScript variables, you typically need to declare an array before you use it. This example creates an array with 4 elements. To assign a value to the array, you use an index in brackets. Indexes begin with 0, so the elements of the array in this example would be numbered 0 to 3. These statements assign values to the 4 elements of the array. You can also declare an array and specify values for elements at the same time. This statement creates the same scores array in a single line. In JavaScript 1.2 and later, you can also use a shorthand syntax to declare an array and specify its contents. This statement is an alternative way to create the scores array. Like strings, arrays have a length property. This tells you the number of elements in the array. If you specified the length when creating the array, this value becomes the length property's value. For example, these statements would print the number 30. You can declare an array without a specific length and change the length later by assigning values to elements or changing the length property. For example, these statements create a new array and assign values to 2 of its elements. In this example, because the largest index number assigned so far is 5, the array has a length property of 6. Remember, elements are numbered starting at 0. You can read the contents of an array using the same notation you used when assigning values. For example, these statements would display the values of the first 3 elements of the scores array. So far, you've used arrays of numbers. JavaScript also allows you to use string arrays or arrays of strings. This is a powerful feature that enables you to work with a large number of strings at the same time. You declare a string array in the same way as a numeric array. In fact, JavaScript does not make a distinction between them. You can then assign string values to the array elements. As with numeric arrays, you can also specify a string array's contents when you create it. Either of these statements would create the same string array as the preceding example. You can use string array elements anywhere you would use a string. You can even use the string methods introduced earlier. For example, this statement prints the first 5 characters of the first element of the names array, resulting in Henry. JavaScript includes a string method called split, which splits a string into its component parts. To use this method, specify the string to split and a character to divide the parts. In this example, the test string contains the name John Q. Public. The split method in the second statement splits the name string at each space, resulting in 3 strings. These are stored in a string array called parts. After the example statements execute, the elements of parts contain the following: parts 0 equals John, parts 1 equals Q, parts 2 equals public. JavaScript also includes an array method join, which performs the opposite function. This statement reassembles the parts array into a string. The value in the parentheses specifies a character to separate the parts of the array. In this case, a space is used, resulting in the final string John Q. Public. If you do not specify a character, commas are used. JavaScript also includes a sort method for arrays, which returns an alphabetically sorted version of the array. For example, these statements initialize an array of 4 names and sort it. The last statement sorts the names array and stores the result in a new array, sorted names. Because the sort method sorts alphabetically, it won't work with a numeric array, at least not the way you'd expect. If an array contains the numbers 4, 10, 30, and 200, for example, it would sort them as 10, 200, 30, 4. Not even close. Fortunately, there's a solution. You can specify a function in the sort method's parameters, and that function will be used to compare the numbers. This code sorts a numeric array correctly. This example defines a simple function, numCompare, which subtracts the 2 numbers. After you specify this function in the sort method, the array is sorted in the correct numeric order, 4, 10, 30, 200. To gain more experience working with JavaScript's string and array features, you can create a script that enables the user to enter a list of names and displays the list in sorted form. Because this will be a larger script, you will create separate HTML and JavaScript files. First, the sort.html file will contain the HTML structure and form fields for the script to work with. This list shows the HTML document. Because the script will be in a separate document, the script tag in the header of this document uses the src attribute to include a JavaScript file called sort.js. You will create this file next. This document defines a form named the form, a text field named new name, an add name button, and a text area named sorted. Your script will use these form fields as its user interface. The script begins by defining 2 variables with the var keyword. NumNames will be a counter that increments as each name is added, and the names array will store the names. When you type a name into the text field and click the button, the onClick event handler calls the sortNames function. This function stores the text field value in a variable, the name, and then adds the name to the names array using numNames as the index. It then increments numNames to prepare for the next name. The final section of the script sorts the names and displays them. First, the sort method is used to sort the names array. Next, the join method is used to combine the names, separating them with line breaks, and display them in the text area. To test the script, save it as sort.js and then load the sort.html file you created previously into a browser. You can then add some names and test the script. Figure 6.2 shows the result after sorting several names. During this lesson, you've focused on variables and how JavaScript handles them. You've learned how to name variables, how to declare them, and the differences between local and global variables. You also explored the data types supported by JavaScript and how to convert between them. You also learned about JavaScript's more complex variables, strings and arrays, and looked at the features that enable you to perform operations on them, such as converting strings to uppercase or sorting arrays. You can now test your knowledge in the quiz area, access the scripts we learned in the lab, or go through the lesson again. The choice is yours. Thank you for choosing Sam's Teach Yourself.